Just recently. There was 2 pages. Oh, okay.
Okay. This is the March 12, 2019 research meeting of the Fire and Police Commission. Present are Commissioners Cocroft, Wilson, and myself, Commissioner DeVogus. It says you're excused, but you're here. Oh, well, there you go.
I'm supposed to be in the Citizen Academy, but it's Thursday.
Okay. Also in attendance is Chief of Staff Nick Desiato and Director Regina Howard, representing the Police Department, and our Executive Director Lakeisha Butler. Ms. Butler, please proceed with the agenda.
First item on the agenda is request to amend Standard Operating Procedure 160, persons with mental illness.
Okay. Before we get to this item, we have a request from Gretchen Schultz to be heard.
On this item?
On this item, yep, item 1.
Okay.
Gretchen?
Is this a surveillance camera?
No, this is, you want to be heard on the surveillance camera issue. Okay, that's item number 2.
So, Commissioners, also for your education, we have Captain Liebel and Dr. Thrasher here as well, in addition to Regina Howard, the Director of OMAP, and Nick Desiato, Chief of Staff.
Okay. The floor is yours.
You want to start?
All right, we're introducing SOP 160 for persons with mental illness. There were some revisions made. The bulk of the revisions were so that our policy was consistent with changes in the statute, and then just to change some of the language to be more patient-friendly.
Do you know what those are?
What the changes are?
Yeah.
There were definitely things in regards to the voluntariness of the 51 commitment process. So those were some of the things that we entered into our SOP was codifying more of those options so that our officers were aware that there were more voluntary options aside from the civil commitment.
Dementia. Let's start with A. It says dementia is not included, but it is a disease. So why wouldn't it? Because I know I've seen people and know of people on dementia who will fight you.
Agreed, ma'am. Yeah, that's purely a recent, it was in the Wisconsin Supreme Court back in 2013. It was called Helen E.F. versus Fond du Lac County, and it basically referenced that cases with dementia would fall more under a different part of the law, such as Chapter 55. They basically pulled it out of the Chapter 51 dynamic as it was not considered a treatable mental illness.
Okay. Crisis assessment response team. They can only conduct psychiatric evaluation on individuals 18 years of age or older. What do we do with those under 18? Other than and I already know about the MUT team. Is that all we do is call them up and say, hurry? The police department, what does maybe I'm talking to the wrong person. What does the police department do?
Well, the police department, our officers are authorized to deal with any individual in crisis, regardless of age. But our CART team is a dual response with BHD. So there are some parameters in regards to juvenile treatment that BHD has that the MUT team covers. So that's why the CART team is specific for 18 or over. But our officers, any officer within the department can interact with anybody at any age.
Are they trained?
All of our officers have had our fundamentals of crisis intervention team training. So that's the 40 hours of mental health training.
All officers?
All of our officers.
And that's as far as it goes?
Yes.
All right. That's not what you told me, but just keep talking. Okay, one more over here with the juveniles, 14 years of age and over may be conveyed for all this is for voluntary. As long as they volunteer to do it, they can do it. It's okay, let me find so you can catch up with me. H, 2 juveniles.
Okay.
Long as it's voluntary, juveniles 14 years of age and over, they can be conveyed for voluntary treatment, but they do have to volunteer to do it. If they say no, then you can't do it, right?
When it comes to voluntary treatment, again, that becomes, do they qualify for a 51? If they don't qualify for a 51, then our ability to put them under the commitment is limited by law. And so if they don't meet that criteria, they have to be voluntary. But that's for any individual. If they don't meet the 51 criteria, they have to be voluntary.
Okay, what is the criteria then? Maybe I just don't know what the criteria is.
As to placing emergency detention, ma'am? So-
Volunteers. Because she just said they have to volunteer to do it, right? So what is it they have to meet? That's what I don't understand.
I think it would be, the way the law is interpreted is everybody is assumed to be voluntary unless they meet certain criteria that then cross over into the breach of emergency detention, which I think was a really good part of these revisions, was to make sure that people understood that people were starting as voluntary, respecting their rights, and then and only then, if meeting the basic criteria under 51.15, do they then get converted to emergency detention, as opposed to assuming they're detainable and have to prove themselves to be voluntary. I think it's just a different frame of mind.
I see. That makes sense, because I know some of these children, and I'm gonna leave it like that.
So I'm understanding, basically, if they're not voluntary, you have to make a determination for the cause for emergency detention, and then,
Yeah, that's
Go that
correct.
course.
So the law is very specific regarding what that is.
And where can I read that law?
It's chapter 5115. The three criteria are, there's three parts. Are mentally ill, drug dependent, or developmentally disabled is one. Number two is evidence. Evidence one of the standards set forth in some of the paragraphs below, and three are reasonably believed to be unable or unwilling to cooperate with voluntary treatment. And then it just goes on for pages and pages of other
I don't want
details.
to go on.
But it's 51 subsection 15, 51.15.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
That's it.
You have any other questions? What about you, Commissioner Cockcroft?
I'm good.
You're gonna need a motion.
Anything else for the good of the group? All right. I need a motion to amend Standard Operating Procedure 160, persons with mental illness. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is it moved and seconded? Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The motion carries.
Item 2 on your agenda is request to amend Standard Operating Procedure 255, Public Video Surveillance.
All right. This is the item that Ms. Gretchen Schultz from the Wisconsin Justice Initiative would like to be heard upon, and we also have a couple others. So typically, and when we have these public comments, we do a 2-minute session, but since it's a little less formal, I'll give a little more time and a little more leeway. That doesn't mean we're doing a dissertation or anything, but I won't be so draconian about the time limit, so I'll probably go 3 to 4 minutes so we can discuss it amongst ourselves as well. So, Ms. Schultz, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Gretchen Schultz. I'm with the Wisconsin Justice Initiative. We are a public advocacy group for improved justice systems, more progressive justice systems in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. We are one of the signatories to the African American Roundtable letter. I don't know that I need 4 minutes. I think my big message is please, please slow down and get answers to all these questions. Last meeting, I watched it, and from beginning to end, it was 3.5 minutes, which I don't think is quite long enough to give deeper consideration to anything, including a one-day weather forecast. And I think this is a much, much more serious topic. Mr. Gelting submitted a memo that had many questions in it that we'd like to see answered, along with the questions listed in both African American Roundtable letters. And for one additional one, there is, Mr. Gelting asked the question, could there be an opportunity for neighborhood groups to fund cameras to be placed at location of their own choosing? I know there's at least one that's already happening too. My question would be, is there an opportunity for neighborhood groups to say, get those cameras down. We don't
I'm
want
sorry,
them.
You said get,
To
Take
get
them down.
those cameras down, we don't want them in our neighborhoods. Is
Right.
there an opportunity for private property owners? Although the memo says that it defines gas stations as public places, they're private property last time I checked. I know the courts have said you can basically aim a camera from public property at private property for an unlimited amount of time. That may be legal. I'm not sure it's right or justified. So what are the limits to this? There's 1,000 questions that need answering before any of this is done. Surveillance cameras are very intrusive and should be debated thoroughly. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have questions or comments?
yeah, I actually have a comment.
Me too.
And I guess it's probably for you or someone who's an attorney. And I want to be clear on what you said. You were talking about private places having cameras. Are you saying that they should not, if it's private, be able to put a camera on their property?
No.
Tell me what you're saying, please.
Come up.
Come back up here.
What I'm saying is, in the material from last time, I think it might have been in the memo, it said the cameras are aimed, the police cameras are aimed at public spaces like bus stops and gas stations. Gas stations are privately owned. I don't know if the police seek permission from the owner. I don't know if the police are filming through windows and doors into privately owned businesses. That's a real,
Okay.
there's a whole lot of questions around that. Is that a search? If they see anything, we don't know what success of these cameras, who pays for we know they're purchased through grants. How are they supported for ongoing operations? How much do we pay to store the video? I mean, there's many, many questions that are just unanswered, but the number of cameras seems to keep growing.
So,
Right.
yeah,
And we don't know where they are. I assume they're in high crime areas. Then we get into that whole, are people being arrested because they're over-policed?
That's what I was gonna say.
Or are they being arrested it's the unvirtuous cycle.
I guess I could see where there would be concerns on both parts. And I'm just trying to think how we can get the input from all people, because I know that people have asked me, why don't you have cameras everywhere? Because, and I don't mean literally everywhere, but in a lot of places, because something happened to me, there was no camera and there was nothing I could do. So I'm trying to help me, and I need people to help me figure out how you can strike a balance between public, private, those who want it and those who don't. Because there are some people who want it in their living room almost, they're so scared.
I believe that, but I also think we need to know, what are the police using them for? What kind of arrests are being made? Is it some guy smoking a joint in the street and the police are coming up to arrest him? Or is it a carjacking where someone could get seriously hurt? I think surveillance is, there's always that slippery slope. What's the limit? Where do we point these things? How do we make sure they're not abused? I used to be a reporter, and there was a city camera guy who was focusing on women's body parts. How do we assure that doesn't happen? How do we, and I just haven't seen that. The discussion has been so limited. I really believe it needs a deep dive with a lot, the word public input again from
Right.
the people these things are aimed at.
But you also got to hear from the people who are aiming them. Because-
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, see, that's why, that's my thing, that I hear you, but also there are other people who are saying, and that came out, that's everything we do, because that was the same thing about chase and no chase. So,
Right.
yeah, so
Right.
that was what I was trying to make sure, and we have to figure that out
Well, and
directly.
I don't know if they have any answer or have
Oh,
any
you have an
comment. I mean,
answer?
they're MPD. I don't know if they have any comment on
I
this
mean,
particular
comment, I know
topic.
you don't have an answer unless you're smarter than I am.
Well, if the department would like to respond, you can feel free to address any of those issues.
Thank you, Ms. Gretchen.
Just respond to what are the benefits and what evidence has been gathered to to use for an arrest? And how do you use, are you using it for like minor crimes or major crimes? Are they targeted neighborhoods? Or is it just cluster? Is one population being over-policed by video surveillance, that type of thing? We'd like to know.
There are cameras on both the north and south sides of Milwaukee, so there's not one particular neighborhood or race of people that are being targeted. And the use of the camera is to actually target crime and specific individuals who may be involved in crime. So if a shooting, for instance, occurs and officers are responding, the public camera that is mounted on public property can be utilized to zoom in and hopefully capture the individual that's actually involved in a crime, can capture the actual shooting as it's going on, and possibly capture a description and lead the officers in the right area so that the officers can focus on specific people in a specific place that are alleged to have committed a specific crime. So that allows the officers to target specific people, specific place, and a specific incident that occurred. Because you have other officers who are utilizing the cameras and watching those cameras and leading the officers who are on the ground to the specific area that they need to go and to the specific person that they may be looking for. So that's how the cameras are used. The cameras are not aimed in anyone's living room. That doesn't happen. There are public cameras just about everywhere on state highways that go directly through our city streets. There are public cameras. So these cameras are not unheard of.
Right.
They're simply utilized in public spaces that the public has a right to be, same as the police department has a right to be, and they're simply used to help the police department address crime. We have finite resources, and the camera is just another set of eyes that helps law enforcement.
So just another tool in the toolbox.
That's all it is.
Yeah, I knew the answer before I asked you, but I needed to be public, and I appreciate your response because you explained it way better than I could. I read it all, so I understood where it was coming from. But as far as the license plate readers, can you explain that?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, that's not noticed on the agenda, so we can't discuss license plate readers today.
Okay.
Sorry.
They're part of the cameras item. They were in the memo.
It was
that
inside,
said-
yeah.
In what memo?
It was in.
I understand that, but that license plate reader is not part of this SOP,
Okay.
and that is not noticed for today's meeting, so we cannot discuss license plate readers because it
Gotcha.
was not properly noticed for discussion today.
As far as public areas defined by the police department is any place, it could be where people gather, but I know you were saying about how the cameras can peer into people's homes. I would like to, personally, I like to see them in some of the alleys. That's public. A lot of things go on in alleys. We feel safe. Neighborhood watches that could possibly, I heard there was one or two that were interested in getting the cameras and do you access the Ring. Incident happened with me at my property, and I have the Ring doorbell, and I was able to email it to the officer, and they actually caught the person. So it's a good tool. And now we got the DNC coming. I know it can be, like you say, a slippery slope, but I think the reason that they're increasing is to protect the public, not to,
police.
overuse and prosecute.
See, and when you said service station, that was an interesting issue because someone I worked with in the Baptist Convention was at a service station, got killed. So sometimes, and that's why I want to hear from both sides, because I totally agree. You have to be very careful when you start talking about invasion of privacy, because pretty soon it gets to be a tad bit too much. But what I do want to do is make sure that everybody who wants to weigh in, and Steve, I think this young man, another young man had their hand up, but everybody who wants to weigh in can weigh in. That's all I
I got
want
extra
to
forms. Elizabeth,
There's more forms.
There's more here, right? You need them. Okay. So so the next person for public comment will be Larry Hoffman. Same rules apply. I'm giving people approximately 4 minutes to address the commission on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this working?
It is.
Yep.
Yes, and what's your last name?
Okay. I timed myself at 5 minutes.
I'll give you some grace.
Hoffman.
Hoffman, Hoffman.
Thank you. Back in 1964, when I was in high school, I read a book titled 1984. It was the classic novel by George Orwell. It was a classic then because it proposed the novel idea of a nation in which surveillance was everywhere. Political leaders used technology, cameras and screens mainly, to enforce the laws. If you avoided the surveillance, you were breaking the law. The government was not democratic, it was autocratic. Any actions or ideas that didn't suit the majority were crushed. Today, in the 21st century, technology businesses and political power can reinforce each other. If government officials need a way to enforce the laws they've passed, they can go to electrical or computer engineers in Silicon Valley or MIT or the UW to build devices or software that'll make enforcement easier. Or the engineers and the entrepreneurs can start with a technology and try to sell it in a way that enhances the productivity of any branch of government, such as the police force. In my written testimony that I submitted to the Fire and Police Commission January 24th, I cautioned you not to adopt a new policy expanding poll camera surveillance without first consulting with university-based experts on the potential violations of ethics and of democracy that it might impose. I wrote that threats to ethics and democracy are inherent in surveillance systems that can identify individuals who have not been convicted of a crime. Systems that can electronically follow a person's actions back in time. I've been a PhD researcher myself, and I appreciate the importance of using credible sources. So I asked that you fully document your sources. And since then, have you consulted with experts on the ethical ramifications of increasing your use of electronic surveillance equipment? Have you documented those consultations? And I don't mean consultation with professors in the business department, but with experts in the humanities and social sciences like sociology, psychology, and history. Can you list the ways that other government bodies have stepped over the line and misused surveillance equipment? Does your standard operating procedure document include how to avoid stepping on the rights of citizens, whether they've done something unlawful or not? The nation that was depicted in Orwell's novel was clearly a dystopia. Unfortunately, 1984 is still a classic today because parts of it have come true. In 2019, we live in a world where our privacy is increasingly breached by electronic media and electronic devices. Governments of some other countries have begun to adopt surveillance systems, apparently without adequate safeguards against their gross misuse. So we have to be very careful not to let our freedoms be compromised by technologies that can be turned into political weapons, or by technologies that will create something like the Terminator, that will track down whoever the government or the police or the CIA or the FBI sees as a threat, a virtual Terminator. So,
1 minute, Mr. Hoffman.
Yes, sir.
Just saying 1 minute.
So do not be casual about poll cameras by simply calling this a technological upgrade. It appears that the latest technological upgrade to the Boeing 737 may have killed several hundred people. When digital technologies can control our lives, we have to be extremely diligent not to pass laws or procedures that simply allow those technologies to proliferate without including protections against any of the collateral damage they may cause. The standard operating procedure for poll cameras, or more importantly, the laws themselves should include statements of what shall not be done. And I'll give you 3 examples. No artificial intelligence or machine learning shall be incorporated into this device. Or perhaps this one. This device shall not be networked with other devices here or in other cities without public hearings and a vote on this individual issue by the Common Council. Or cameras will not be aimed at X or Y. I have a couple of articles for you. Both of them describe how municipal governments in the United States have implemented new technologies to assist in tracking down perpetrators, and then they've slid down the slippery slope to violate human rights. You can also find documentaries on public TV and public radio that have dealt with this issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Will you hand it to Madam Secretary? Is that your appropriate title in this committee? Ms. Moore, he's going to give you something.
I have 3 copies of each of them. That's not enough.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you.
Commissioners, you have anything you want to ask?
Do you have anything? Well, the only thing I'm gonna say is we need a summit, because there's 2 sides, and there are and I agree with all of this. We have to figure out how to make it happen. You need all of your university people, you even almost need attorneys. There's a whole other set of people, and I'm sure we'll hear of several more that need to be included in this. So for now, I'll just wait until everybody gets through, and then I'll say it.
I was just, I kind of chuckled when you brought up 1984, because we just saw Enemy of the State with Will Smith, so, you know.
So this is the question that I have, and maybe I have 2 questions. The first part is, I believe Ms. Howard stated that these cameras are placed on public property and the public. Do you know of any, and maybe this is to you or Mr. Desiato, is there any law against that being, like, if people go outside and there's a public camera pointed at the street, is there any law against that kind of surveillance?
No, there isn't. There isn't a law that prohibits that. It certainly would be the same thing as officers being outside with their body cameras on. It's in public, and we have no right to privacy in the public.
And that's my understanding of, and maybe Mr. DeTore, when I let him come up, he'll have something different, but from my understanding of being at Marquette Law School, the law of privacy says if you're in the public, there's no expectation of privacy whatsoever. And from what I understand, that's shrinking. Now, the ACLU is the foremost expert on that, so I will defer to them when I bring Mr. DeTore up.
Because there were other issues that were raised.
Oh, yeah, that's part 2.
Oh, okay.
That's
All
part
right,
2
then
of-
that's why I said I'm gonna wait till part 2.
So that part 1 is that part, but then part 2 is, well, actually, then there's 3 parts. Part 2 is how is the footage going to be used? If the footage, like, you're not going to be, is it going to be used for, when you say crime, is crime defined as felony level crime, or is it misdemeanor level crime? Like, how do you define that term crime for the use of this, use of this footage?
Well, it varies. Our focus is mainly on violent crime with the use of cameras. However, there may be, could be a missing person, a person that is mentally ill or that has some sort of issue that would necessitate law enforcement doing an active search for that individual. They could have passed by any number of public cameras, and we need to utilize those cameras, if necessary, to help us find that person if they're missing and in imminent danger. It would be our responsibility, and if public cameras are not available, the next logical thing that law enforcement would automatically do is look to see if there are any privately owned cameras anywhere, and we would go to those places, whether it's a residence or a business, and request to view the private cameras if there's something that we need to see. We would make that request.
So you're saying it could be used not only for violent crime, but for, like, maybe amber and silver alerts?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It would be appropriate for us to utilize the cameras for that reason. It's important for us to locate people who are in danger.
It really varies. In a past life with the city attorney's office, this was maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had a problem business that they they had a surveillance camera, pole camera, and they ended up having a brawl in the street outside of that location. And it was useful to help deploy, and it's also helpful from a licensing perspective. And it was priceless footage in a location there was a concern for public safety. And that concern was corroborated by using in that location that there was an incident pretty soon after it was placed up there.
Mhm.
So it really depends on what it's used, on what happens.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. DeTore, I welcome you to the die.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name is Emilio DeTore. I'm Director of Community Engagement for the ACLU of Wisconsin. So I had a script, and I've been taking notes, and I feel like I have 20 scripts, so I'll try to keep it short. You know, philosophically, I ask is just because we can do something, should we do that something? You know, I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony concerning SOP 255. And I think it is incredibly important for us to understand the need for these cameras, functioning, impact, usage, and effectiveness for what some folks are hoping to deploy in our community prior to its approval and deployment and pending regular evaluations. The increasing secret use of surveillance tech by police forces across the country, especially against communities of color, demonstrators, college students, families, folks of religious minorities, and other unjustly targeted groups is creating oppressive, stigmatizing environments where communities feel like they're being treated as prospective criminals first and residents second. So we're surveilling you in anticipation that you are going to break the law. Enjoy your day. The overuse of surveillance has put many non-white, low-income neighborhoods under a microscope where the residents' public behavior is monitored and scrutinized 24 hours a day in ways very much like those in totalitarian countries like North Korea and China are. There have been extensive studies already by universities and international agencies showing how if you're being watched or you think you're being watched 24 hours a day, it has a homogenizing and debilitating effect on you psychologically. People shouldn't have to feel like they are a prisoner in their own neighborhoods. These high surveillance environments facilitate the unjust and disproportionate tracking, arrest, and imprisonment of those community residents. We just heard that there will be people monitoring these cameras who can be directed instantly to look at a situation. That means that somebody's sitting there watching you all day. Sweeping implementations of domestic surveillance included in SOP 255 are frightening. Please don't forget, because we haven't forgotten, that the Milwaukee Police Department used stingrays 579 times without the Common Council's knowledge, without the knowledge of the residents of Milwaukee, or even the warrant-issuing judge's knowledge, knowing that they were being used to intercept data from every cell phone within a 1.5-mile radius of the stingray each time they used it. So imagine how many cell phones are in a 1.5 miles from here. That means they were potentially able to intercept all phone calls, text messages, and even content stored on the phones from tens of thousands of people, all without civilian oversight. And many MPD officers knew these practices were going on, but of course they had signed contracts in agreement with outside vendors and the federal government, which we will be doing with these cameras if we are signing into something that's actually giving us the money to purchase them, which allowed them or directed them to not share this information, so they couldn't if they wanted to. Why should we treat the video recording of thousands of Milwaukeeans conducting their regular business, their everyday lives, as anything less important? That this information will be going to fusion centers is also scary. Fusion centers are notorious for blurring the lines of information sharing and storage. It's really kind of what they were designed for. And although the Milwaukee Police Department may delete the records after 120 days, who's to say that the many federal agencies who have access to this don't already have copies duplicated by then? Obviously, or I'm using obviously too much, but perhaps all of you also recognize that facial recognition software is very inexpensive. These will probably be much higher quality cameras than the blurry black and white ones the DOT has lining our highways. These will probably be high resolution. They can be encrypted or not. And we should not be surprised if this is the case with the surveillance camera system, particularly since this SOP change was partially instigated by the input of the Federal Homeland Security Department. China, North Korea, and England are the only nations more heavily surveilled than we are right now, and the implications are staggering. I invite you all to read an article from The Economist that was in October, which talks about how the Chinese government has a rating system for citizens now based on what their cameras and facial recognition use. So your social interactions, whether or not you have arguments, pertains to your travel, your credit score, it's all linked into the same thing. By being proactive and enshrining intelligent procedures and policies, we can create safe and equitable practices. We shouldn't race to approve a new toy hastily, even though we can all think of examples where this might be useful. It's not historically what happens. How we store the data, how long it's stored, who has access to it, whether or not these videos will be shared with ICE and other federal government agencies, how it can be accessed, upon whom it's used, what's its measurable impact, why do we need this now and not different methods to diminish crime, who approves these contracts with vendors, who overlooks these contracts with vendors, including usage and ownership and disclosure. Do the private vendors also have access to this data in the ways that some private vendors have access to the data that Cellbrite, that, say, police forces like Madison use to duplicate cell phones, have access? That's a military contractor from Israel. How useful and cost-effective is this? These are all incredibly important questions, as are the questions we heard from these other folks. And they're not currently answered, and I think that the people in Milwaukee have a right to know this. The idea of the Milwaukee Police Department using license plate readers to track and record your cars, stingrays to record your cell phone usage and texts, and now many digital cameras to record your movements, and then aggregating and sharing them all with a variety of federal governments and departments in one of our 2 Wisconsin fusion centers. All of this without civilian oversight is stifling and restrictive and not the direction we should be taking. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments in response to Mr. DeTore's testimony, Commissioners?
Yeah. Tell me about this civilian oversight, because pretty soon we're going to oversight the oversighter. No, and I'm not trying to be, because everything needs somebody to watch them.
It does.
And so how do we facilitate that while ensuring that people are safe? Because I'm going to tell you something, these no-good cell phones track you everywhere you go anywhere. We all ought to blow them up and throw them away, but none of us will, and I won't either, by the way. But we need to figure out how to strike a balance, because between writing and talking, we've received almost 100 questions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how do we facilitate them, but when there are people and children and others out here who just want to be safe?
Absolutely.
And they don't understand that.
Absolutely.
Help me
So
to
I'm
tell
really
us
glad.
how we can do it.
I'm really glad you've asked that question, Commissioner Wilson. I've been working with the Common Council here and the Common Council in Madison, and there is a really good model legislation for what civilian oversight for all technology purchases could look like. These are growing pains that we're having as a planet, not just here in Milwaukee. The prevalence of technology, the advancements of technology. I mean, we're being recorded by a cell phone as we speak, in addition to other cameras. There's probably kids playing iPads nearby. Just because we don't like it doesn't mean it's going to go away. So creating civilian oversight using some of the resources we have, like professors from the university system, like individuals who care enough to and have the capabilities to measure impact, that are going to ask the hard questions of what constitutes public or private responsibility or rights, who can ask the questions and have the time to research whether or not, if the Milwaukee Police Department is living up to their obligations of deleting files after 120 days, is another federal agency making unauthorized duplicates of these things? Is it being used disproportionately on targeted ethnic or racial groups, such as the New York City Police Department did with their unlawful surveillance of mosques in New York City? So there's lots of bad instances that we can find, and I've already written, with the help of many other people, sample ordinances that you can use that would enshrine oversight so that the police or whatever other body that was coming to you or whatever other aldermanic oversight could ask a certain series of questions and examine these repercussions. You're right, it's super important, and it's difficult, but it's our obligation to think of these things and make sure that we're setting a good practice in place. And I'm happy to share copies of those things with you.
And all these people from the universities and stuff that did this oversight, they did it for free. They didn't charge anything.
I don't know about that.
Well, see, because the same folks you telling us to oversee this, i.e. the Common Council, are the same folks that say, well, we don't have any money.
Yeah, it's not, I'm happy to share it so we can actually look
I'd
at the
like to
document
see
itself
that.
and not speculate on,
Yeah.
on different things. It's not just the Common Council. It would be a civilian oversight, so it would be input from individuals from the community who have specialized areas of expertise. It would require law enforcement or whoever is requesting these things to do impact studies in the same way that we ask businesses to do impact studies when they're going to construct something new, say, like building a factory in a wetland or taking a look at traffic flow or pollution impact, because putting many, many cameras into the hearts of our communities is going to have an impact, whether we admit it does or not. And how it's used may change from group to group. So we may have a group of people who have all the best reasons and motives for wanting to put these cameras in for safety, but then the practice becomes very different depending on who's behind the camera that day or for those hours, or who's not checking or is checking these things. So for every great example of how something might have happened had there been a camera, there are many examples of these things happened because there was undue surveillance. So if we can set up the rules, it prevents people from cheating.
I like that.
Thank you.
I don't like cheating.
Do I? I just thought it on the fly, too.
I like that. I worked at St. Mike's, St. Joe's, and I was a camera operator. And there were some abuses by some of the camera operators. They're supposed to be looking for safety, and they're zooming in on things they shouldn't be zooming in. On people's homes, and you find it, you report it, and then they get reprimanded. And
You see that in the news, even.
See it a lot.
The bloopers.
So it's just human nature to just be nosy and test the boundaries. And that's kind of like when the Enemy of the State, when I watched that movie, it was
You
like,
need to stop watching it.
I watch it over and over because
It's
I
prophetic.
feel like I'm being watched, but I know I'm not doing anything, so it doesn't really bother me. And I know it could have an impact on people if they feel, some people are paranoid. Some people are paranoid for a reason, because they're doing something.
Or some people become paranoid because they're being watched.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah. Just being watched is an invasion of privacy, you could say. Because just like he's videotaping me now. People are videotaping every day.
Mm-hmm.
I see people in stores videotaping people without them knowing it. So it's a big problem, but we
what do
got to
you
find
do
some
with
balance.
those people? Commissioner, what do you do with those people? I mean, are you saying we need to monitor the police department more than we monitor? What are those people in those stores and places doing with that? What are people who have cameras in their house? See, the thing gets to be, who do you monitor, who do you don't? Who do you ask and who do you don't? He's filming me, taking pictures or whatever now. So how, this just seems to me, and I know y'all way more smarter than I am, it just seems so overwhelming, because for everything that everybody said here tonight that's true, there's another person can sit right next to him and make a diabolically different argument about it. And that's where I am. I mean, I know what folks do with cameras, and it just seems that I almost feel like, are we saying that the police, all of them gonna go out there and get something and do something wrong, or what are we saying?
Well,
Whew.
I
don't know what to
I always
say.
like to err on safety, so whatever's the safest thing for the public, and that would be, I guess, above board, in just layman's terms, just to make it simple. It has to be above board, and everybody has to know what's on the table and the rules. It's got to be a little more transparency, I would think. I understand that having the poll cameras in certain areas, you just can't, if they're trying to surveil people who are, or areas of high crime. You don't want the criminals to know where every camera is.
That was a good point the gentleman to my right brought up. But we have an infrastructure in place. If I suspect that there's crime, then I can get a warrant and then request for anything, a cell phone drop, or say, we'd like to install some cameras here because we have this evidence that, and then the infrastructure is there. Just randomly 24/7 videotaping people doing their thing, I don't know what that helps.
So it's more like you were saying, it's almost like a warrant to use it.
Yes.
That would be better.
In the same way you would ask to tap a cell phone or get internet records. There's a difference between private folks videotaping in an area where there's no expectation of privacy and cameras run by our government 24/7 where this information may be shared all over the place and who knows where or how. There are laws in place for if, for example, someone were to videotape under the skirt of a child or somebody, that's a crime. And as you indicated, if people are being stared at or video recorded all the time, that's going to have an effect on you. You just said it has an effect on you. Now imagine a community that already is feeling the impact of poverty, of perhaps an increase in crime, of other issues going on, and now we add a dimension of them being surveilled all the time. It's almost as though we're punishing that neighborhood even more. What would we need to do to support law enforcement so that they could root out the crime more effectively in a more targeted way? So say using a laser instead of a hammer.
Let me ask you a question. I went to some, but this has been a few years ago. At the police station, don't you know at all times who's doing this? Don't they, there was something where they had to log in and you knew every time that someone was using the computer to look at the footage and that kind of thing? Or is it just, don't you always know who's doing that, or is it kind of random, whoever's working tonight?
Whenever any of our law enforcement officers and or civilian employees use any of the Milwaukee Police Department systems, you have to log in, and your login is individual and unique to you. So we would always know who's logged in, who's looking at anything on any of our systems.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank you. I remain at your disposal if you have questions in the future.
Do you have anything that, does the department have anything they want to respond to that the public may have brought up in testimony or anything that's come to mind before I go to the next public speaker?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. The next individual is Brother Rice Bay from the Moore Science Temples of America.
Good day, Pete.
Good day, good day.
Well. I'm just coming as a citizen, right? And I feel totally violated. Like, how many cameras are y'all installing? Or are they already installed? Because we know usually you throw the smoke up and next thing you know, voila, it's magic. And by me actually being also actually the Amani United president, I'm speaking for a lot of people right now. And I'm speaking from both sides of the table. I once was, undesirable. Now I'm a law-abiding citizen. Why do I feel more violated now than I did beforehand, right? Because I see beforehand why you would put them, but that also puts a neighborhood back against the wall even more. Things are getting tighter and tighter. And I am looking at some people who are, let me just use in the words of the prophet, I do hereby believe that the administration that I'm looking at of government being more wisely prepared by more genius citizens that believe in the free national standards of the Constitution. What's the difference between lawful and legal? Yes, legally, you can do this legally, but lawfully you finna violate me and the people who trust in this Constitution. So what are we supposed to do about that? What am I supposed to do about that? Because I am a citizen, correct? I'm going to ask another question, since I'm dealing with some people who are duly prepared. What is the nationality of the people who sit at the table I'm talking to? May I ask you, your nationality?
Oh, they can't respond
Oh,
back
they
to
can't
you.
respond? Well, I'm going to ask you.
Oh, I'm African American.
You?
Black.
You?
Black.
You?
Black, sorry.
And you, ma'am? Basically, everybody just answer out of the constitutional fold of government. Because those names are not under the those are not respected under the Constitution. Because where is black land? Where is Africa America?
Well, be honest, everybody's from Africa.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So we have to understand, but everybody has a nationality, the nation they belong to.
Well,
Hold on. All right, you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure this out because I knew for years how I wasn't, my rights were being kind of converted because I didn't know them. Because I thought I was a citizen. You can't be a citizen without a true identity in the town, in the country that you are representing. So no, I didn't have a voice amongst the government or the nations which I live. So that's why my people are being violated with unjust laws. But it's time for us to enforce the Constitution. That's what you people are here for, to enforce it. But you really can't enforce it if you have no nationality. I need y'all to kind of understand that. So right now I'm bringing a few things that may be new, but this town needs to understand that we're all being violated because we are actually promoting our own destruction and we supporting it. Because this is finna actually tear a town totally up. Who benefits, who loses? My people lose again. They lose again, and they lose again, and they lose again. Whether they win that, y'all supposed to guide them somewhere. They already feel boxed in. I'm right there with them. They're boxed in. They're ready to blow at any given second. Is this going to help or is this going to hurt? That's what we have to look at. We want to crunch a lot of numbers, but people are not numbers. People are not numbers. They're not statistics. That's that.
All right, thank you. Do you have any questions?
Anybody got any questions?
Go
all
ahead.
right, comment.
Comment, go ahead.
Well, you do have a say. And right now, you have a say. And your vote is your franchise. You know, being a citizen, you know, you can, you know, you exercise your franchise. Vote, you know, in the United States anyway. But as far as like people, you know, it's just, I kind of explain it too when I go speak to high schoolers and children about race and whatnot. I just let them know, hey, look, you can't put a BMW part on the Chevy. But with humans, they're transferable. We're all one. It's a human race. And we got to do what's best for the race. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah, let's do what's best for the people because we losing, ain't we? It's like things are getting kind of far out of hand. So without the proper things to put us back, how are we going to get back without truth? Most of us don't have the courage enough for it. Most of us hide it. You know, some take an oath to hide it. Well, I took a covenant to tell you. You know? And we have to understand what is really going on. When you label yourself and you don't label yourself properly, you're out of the constitutional fold of government, so therefore you have no rights. My people have been violated for a very long time because they are practicing principles that delude to slavery. They don't know whether they Negro, black, colored, or African American. Am I correct? Which one of them is you?
True.
Those names were given to slaves by slaveholders in 1779 and lasted 1865. But there's a new era in time now. All men now must have a free national name to be respected by the government in which they live and the nations of the earth. But with that, my piece is on the record.
I just have a question. When you said who's it going to help, who's it going to hurt, when I referred to everything you said, there'll be somebody sitting next to you to say just the opposite.
Say just the opposite.
And I'm trying to figure out how do we control the world, because if you can figure that out, I can stop a whole lot of stuff that's going on. We're going to talk about that tonight, because this is about the SOP.
Let's get this SOP.
This SOP, the question that you raised, who's this going to help, who's it going to hurt?
Who's it going to
And
hurt?
everybody has to answer that question. There's a group that says it hurts, but I guarantee you, you get a group of 50 that say it helped, and you get another group of 50 that say it hurt. And therein lies your problem.
Well, that means it evens itself out. That means it should be no. We should govern each other. You should be my eye in the sky. See, if we get back to loving each other,
hey,
we govern out. We just govern our whole
let's talk now,
neighborhood.
brother. But
Now,
until we get
until
to
then-
that point, what do we do?
Until
and
then,
that's the question of
it
the
don't-
SOP.
Yeah, I can dig
That's
it.
the question of the SOP. What are we going to do
Until then, we
get
need
to
artificial intelligence to govern us. Until then, think about it, we need artificial intelligence. Think about it, artificial. What was the real intelligence? Let's go back to the real intelligence. Let's go back to us. We was the real intelligence. We just gave up our life to somebody else and said, well, somebody else got to make sure I'm watching myself. We forgot to do these things, y'all. We forgot. We didn't need this stuff 900 years ago.
Any other questions or comments?
That's
Thank
it.
you, sir.
All right.
All right, so we got to bring this thing to a head. What is the will of the committee?
Sorry, I came in late and there were no papers there.
Would you like to be heard?
Yes.
Okay.
And because
You made it by the skin of your teeth because we was about to vote.
Mr. Rose, we gonna hear.
Yes, I was having trouble finding parking out there. And just want to, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but my older sister she lived in Alaska, and she has a condo in Arizona, Scottsdale. They installed the pole lights in Scottsdale. It made her a terrible driver because she was so afraid every time she came to a stoplight or a green light or a yellow light that the camera was going to pick her up. And so I think we have to be really careful that we're targeting the people we want to target, and not just the everyday drivers who are now going to become worse drivers because they're afraid they're going to get picked up. I think I mentioned at one point about the license plate readers, and I don't remember what the answer was, but it wasn't really helpful. So are we still using license plate readers, and whose license plates are getting read, and how are those readings being used? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, commissioners.
I move to hold. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered and researched a little more deeper, and the public needs another opportunity to speak. That's my motion.
Do you second it, Commissioner Wilson?
Yeah, I'll second it, but I want to know, because what is my question, Lord? There's so many, we need the whole list till the year after next. I mean, no, and I'm not trying to be, I mean, this is a lot of stuff, y'all. I guess I would ask, what is the impact it's going to have on the police department for holding it for a couple months or for however long it's going to take to get this ironed out? Does it mean that we'll never catch another criminal? I mean, what does it mean?
I think it'd be really minimal. This is creating a new
Right.
SOP.
Oh, good.
It's already one in place. So.
Then my suggestion will be, if people are willing to give us time and give the police time to go through all this and get all the answers, and that's not gonna happen in the next day or two.
Yeah. Well, you know what, maybe we could bring it, I'm not asking you guys to comb the waterfront, but if we can get a formal response to our researcher, Dave, did they already give us Dave's response to Dave's questions in his memo?
I don't know. I doubt it.
Okay.
I'd have to check.
So if we can get a response to at least the questions raised by our own researcher, and then any questions that were raised today by the public, that would be, I think, a good start. And then we won't, and then at least, we can cause this to evolve. But I don't want to, it's like Commissioner Wilson said repeatedly, it's a balance. There's arguments on both sides. And so I don't want to, be King Solomon and split the baby, but I think at least we should get the questions that have been raised or addressed answered. So
You have to keep in mind, there's all these questions that the round table sent in too. So I'm saying, how long?
Right, and so are we only talking about those questions? I know
No.
I was taking notes, but I definitely don't have everybody's questions down verbatim. we do have the video. So are you,
So yeah, so the questions that, like some questions we might not be able to answer
Right.
at this time. But the questions that we can answer, I think we should answer. And I think Dave's, researcher Gelting's memo is a good start. And then whatever questions kind of jumped out from today's testimony or questions that the commissioners want to submit to the department, we'll get answers to those and then move from there. So then hopefully it won't take months, but 2 months, maybe a month, but we can start moving the ball down the road.
so we'll work towards that then if the motion passes.
So we got
The next meeting won't be until,
Try to put a time on it, but
May.
since we can.
yeah, so and that'll be determined by the department too, and their timetable. So we have a motion pending,
Second.
and you seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. We'll hold it pending a response from the department on the questions aforementioned. And if
And-
you need clarification, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll give you clarification. I know a lot was said today, so. All right, so we're moving on to item 3. With item 3, SOP. Request to rescind standard operating instruction, nuisance properly surveillance. Have we done that already?
Yeah.
We did item 3? Oh, okay.
Wait,
Oh, I wasn't here.
Not today.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we did it another time.
right, you all had, I think,
The reset.
yeah, I think this one, I can't remember, but I thought, excuse me, they were all sent back to committee at that meeting. So if you can still take the same action, you just have to do it again formally.
Oh, okay.
for us to refer.
All right, do we have a motion to redo it?
Yeah,
Redo?
a motion to approve.
All right.
To rescind.
The motion to second, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. All right, that concludes our regular agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? We stand adjourned. Thank you.